What if a serene morning drive suddenly turned into a nightmare? How does a beloved community member become the target of an unexpected act of violence? And what are the consequences when justice remains elusive for almost 50 years? Daniel Ashton Walker was a cherished member of his community, respected and adored for his warm nature and unwavering willingness to assist those around him. However, the serenity of his existence was abruptly shattered on the fateful morning of October 1, 1974. Unbeknownst to him, a dark cloud was forming over the tranquility of his life. The day started like any other for Daniel, with no hint of the calamity that would befall him. As the sun began its ascent into the sky, painting the heavens in hues of orange, and Daniel carried on with his daily routine, unaware that his life was about to take a devastating turn. Daniel's Volkswagen van was parked alongside Interstate 40, around 60 miles to the west of Needles, in San Bernardino County, California. Accompanied by a passenger, an 18-year-old hitchhiker, Ken Robinson, he picked up. They had decided to take a break from their journey and rest for a while. The day before, he packed his van and left family in Santa Ana on his way back home. The vast expanse of the California desert stretched out before them, offering a momentary respite from the humdrum of their daily lives. As the clock struck 6 a.m., Daniel and Ken settled in, preparing for a brief pause in their travels. The peaceful stillness of the early morning hours enveloped them as they reclined in the savoring the calm before the impending storm. The tranquility of their brief respite was shattered as Daniel was jolted awake by the sudden crackle of gunfire. An unknown assailant had emerged from the shadows, unleashing a barrage of bullets that tore through the peaceful morning air. Daniel, caught off guard and defenseless, was struck multiple times. Ken, gripped by terror and the instinct for survival, managed to evade the onslaught. Fleeing from the scene, they desperately sought help as the darkness of the early morning enshrouded them. Eventually, they succeeded in flagging down a passing motorist, who swiftly contacted the authorities. Emergency personnel arrived at the scene, wasting no time in transporting Daniel to a nearby hospital. The medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize him, but despite their best efforts, Daniel succumbed to his injuries, his life tragically cut short. Daniel Ashton Walker, a beloved young man on the cusp of his 22nd birthday, was gone. Law enforcement worked with unwavering determination, meticulously combing the scene for any evidence that could provide insight into the identity of the elusive assailant. As the investigation into Daniel's tragic demise unfolded, detectives initially suspected that robbery was the motive behind the shooting. However, perplexing details emerged that cast doubt on this theory. Bafflingly, the perpetrators had only taken $80 from Daniel, inexplicably leaving behind a substantial amount of $600 in travelers' checks. The circumstances became even more mysterious when it was discovered that the assailants had not taken Daniel's motorcycle, stereo system, or luggage stored in the back of his van. With a clear description of the suspect's vehicle in hand, law enforcement officials in California, Nevada, and Arizona were notified and stopped and searched each gold van matching the reported description. Investigators spoke to a delivery man who said earlier that morning the suspects waved him down after their gold van was stuck in the sand. One of the suspects told the delivery man they were heading to Indiana, and that they carried a shotgun to shoot down posts and sagebrush to use for tire traction should they get stuck. The delivery man helped tow the van and refused payment for his services. The coordination between law enforcement agencies across state lines underscored the seriousness of the case. This served as a testament to their commitment to finding answers and ensuring that the individual or individuals behind the senseless act would be held accountable. While Ken's account provided some valuable information, the underlying motive behind the attack remained elusive. Detectives explored a range of potential theories in an effort to make sense of the seemingly random act of violence. They examined the possibility of a targeted attack with personal motives, as well as the likelihood that it was a random act of aggression. The remote location of the crime, occurring along a desolate stretch of highway, further complicated the case. Premeditated the assault or seized an opportunity that presented itself? Despite the thorough investigation of the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office, they were unable to bring it to a resolution. Over the course of 5 decades, the case was periodically revisited by the Sheriff's Department's cold case team, who tenaciously searched for new leads. The passage of time proved to be a formidable opponent, and the team was unable to develop any actionable information to finally solve the case of Daniel Ashton Walker. In a significant development on November 15, 2023, the cold case team resumed their investigation. Their renewed efforts led them to identify the infamous serial perpetrator, 73-year-old Thomas Eugene Creech, as the primary suspect in the case in January 2024. This breakthrough was based on crucial information, which included corroborated intimate details from Creech's own statements about the slaying case. To ensure the validity of their findings, the San Bernardino County District Attorney's cooperation further solidified the case against Creech, leading the San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office to consult on the next steps in pursuing justice for Daniel Walker. Thomas Eugene Creech, a convicted perpetrator with a history of multiple confessions, found himself implicated in Daniel's case just after his clemency hearing. He is Idaho's longest-serving inmate that will be executed for several different slayings. He has a total of 5 convictions, but some believe that he could be responsible for more than 40 different slayings. They believe so due to his confession at a trial in 1975 where he admitted to slaying 42 people in more than a dozen states across America. Despite authorities verifying Creech's statements about Daniel's case, his public defender raised concerns about the timing of these revelations. They suggested that past efforts to link Creech to numerous slayings had been unsubstantiated. Ada County prosecutors described Creech as an unrepentant, manipulative sociopath, implying that his recent statements might be a calculated ploy to avoid execution. The gravity of the case and the complexity of Creech's character added further layers of intrigue to the pursuit of justice for Daniel. As Thomas Eugene Creech is identified as the primary suspect in Daniel Walker's case, the community of San Bernardino County nears closure. After nearly 50 years, justice may finally be served in this tragic case of senseless violence, bringing a measure of solace to Daniel's loved ones and the community at large. Daniel's brother, Doug Walker, self-published a book on Amazon titled, Daniel, My Brother, Mystery in the Mojave. Doug said he devoted 2 chapters in the book to his brother's character. In the father's last letter to Daniel, he wrote, "Everyone speaks so highly of you, always and without exception." The San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office have not announced yet whether they plan to extradite and prosecute Creech. Spokeswoman Jacqueline Rodriguez said, "We are in receipt of the reports and are in continued contact with Ada County District regarding the pursuit of justice in this matter." For Doug Walker, justice does not necessarily include executing Creech. He said, "As long as they can prove whoever did it, that is fine with me. Whether they lose their life or not, that is not my decision. That is above my pay grade." Who was Scott Parrish, the respected businessman and community volunteer from Fort Wayne, Indiana? What secrets lay hidden behind his seemingly perfect life? For nearly 18 years, his tragic demise remained a mystery that shook the community to its core. Robert Scott Parrish, a 49-year-old businessman, was the respected owner of Parrish Wallpaper and Paint Incorporated located in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Born and raised in Fort Wayne, Scott had deep roots in the community, where he was widely recognized not only for his entrepreneurial success, but also for his extensive volunteer work with numerous local organizations. Scott was a devoted family man, cherished by his parents Jim and Nancy Parrish, and his siblings Mike, Greg, Tom, and Danny. His dedication to both his business and community made him a well-loved figure in Fort Wayne. Scott's company was more than just a local business. It was a testament to his commitment to quality and service, earning the trust and loyalty of countless customers over the years. Little did anyone know that beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life lay the seeds of a tragedy that would soon unfold. On the evening of March 29, 2006, around 6:30 p.m., Danny, Scott's brother, and his wife, Patty, became alarmed when Scott failed to appear at work and did not answer his phone. Fearing something was wrong, they went to Scott's house in the 1000 block of Vermont Avenue to check on him. Inside, they made a horrifying discovery. Scott was in the bathroom, unresponsive and with a gunshot wound to the head. In a panic, they called the police immediately. When the police arrived, Danny and Patty explained how they found Scott sitting on the toilet, fully clothed with the lid down and suffering from a gunshot wound. The scene was gruesome, with blood splattered on the wall next to the toilet and dried blood on the cabinet in front of him. It was declared at the scene that Scott had lost his life. He had 2 contact gunshot wounds behind his left ear, one exiting through the top of his head, and the other through his forehead. He also had a through-and-through gunshot wound on his upper arm. Crime scene investigators found a brass-colored, .40 caliber Smith & Wesson shell casing on the bathroom floor near the bathtub. Another shell casing was located on the floor in front of the toilet, close to Scott's left hand. A third projectile was discovered on the bathroom sink. As investigators continued their search, they uncovered an unexpected find: a concealed marijuana grow operation hidden behind a false wall in the basement. Nearby, they found a Black & Decker cordless screwdriver, suggesting recent use. This discovery raised numerous questions. Was Scott involved in illicit activities, or was someone else using his property without his knowledge? Could this illegal operation be connected to his demise? Investigators were now faced with unraveling a complex case where the image of Scott as a respected businessman and community volunteer was suddenly shadowed by the dark secrets hidden in his home. The following day, the coroner officially classified the demise as a slaying case. His wallet was found in the Heartland Church parking lot over a mile away from his home. There was no money in the wallet, but it had his driver's license and library card. In January 2008, police interviewed a witness who had known Scott for 3 years. When questioned about the case, the witness identified a Hispanic man named Derek Rodney Johnson, known as Q, whom the police already suspected. The witness described Johnson, originally from Texas, as someone who often boasted about committing robberies and slayings. On January 22, 2008, another key witness came forward with important information. This witness recounted a conversation with Johnson that took place a few weeks after Scott's life was taken. The witness recalled talking with Johnson in his kitchen on South Lafayette Street, where he showed them 2 marijuana plants growing in a closet. He then claimed that he had taken the plants during a robbery. The witness reported that Johnson admitted to shooting Scott in the head during the robbery, when he attempted to access a gun in a safe in his bathroom. Johnson mentioned that there were several marijuana plants in Scott's basement, but he only took 2 plants and a small bag of marijuana. Further details from the witness indicated that Johnson had possessed 2 .40 caliber guns at one point, but their current location was unknown. On July 31, 2014, detectives interviewed Johnson at the Westville Correctional Facility. He was already in state prison after pleading guilty to 2 counts of aggravated battery and 1 count of criminal recklessness for shooting Leonardo Puentes in Fort Wayne in 2006. He was sentenced to 34 years, and his earliest possible release date for that sentencing is 2029. After being informed of his rights and signing a waiver, he admitted to knowing Scott through a mutual acquaintance, Witness 1, with whom he worked on construction sites. He also revealed that he initially bought marijuana from Scott through Witness 1, and later directly from Scott. He then confessed to carrying 2 .40 caliber Smith & Wesson guns around the time of Scott's having used it during an illegal substance purchase. On July 1, 2015, detectives received a letter from Johnson, who was then at the NCCF Annex in Newcastle. In the letter, he claimed that his gang, Northern Vados Locos, had executed Scott for stealing marijuana and money. He stated that while he knew the identity of the perpetrator, he could not disclose it due to the gang's code of silence. Johnson explained that he had reported Scott to his superiors in the gang and had ordered the hit. He even mentioned receiving photos of Scott after the slaying from the shooter. Johnson clarified that there would be no signs of struggle, as the gang members, frustrated with Scott's deceit, had sat him down on the toilet and shot him, but insisted he never wanted anyone to be harmed. Johnson claimed that the weapon had been passed to someone in his crew and eventually sold to an unknown individual. He described the guns as a matched set, 1 left-handed and 1 right-handed, but denied ever owning twin .40 caliber Smith & Wesson guns. Where he admitted to carrying 2 .40 caliber Smith & Wesson guns and being armed during his transactions with Scott, Johnson backtracked. He claimed he had owned many types of guns and was not certain if the bullet came from one of his weapons. For nearly 18 years, the case remained unsolved with no arrests. In 2023, Detective Brian Martin and Detective Darren Strayer began interviewing witnesses again. Finally, in 2024, new evidence and witness testimonies emerged, leading to charges against Derek Johnson. Johnson's motive for the case appeared to be connected to the marijuana grow operation he found in Scott's basement. He confessed to detectives that he had shot Scott in the head and taken the marijuana plants. This breakthrough is a significant development for the Fort Wayne community. It brings closure to the Parrish family and finally delivers justice for the victim after nearly 18 years. Detective Brian Martin credits playing cards that FWPD placed in local jails that feature profiles of unsolved slaying cases, leading to a new interview in the case. Danny said that he had not slept well since that night in 2006. He and his wife set up a memorial bench for Scott at Lakeside Park in Fort Wayne. Derek Rodney Johnson's sentencing date must still be announced. What happened to Dylan Rounds, the 19-year-old farmer from Idaho? How did a young man known for his love of the outdoors suddenly vanish? Is he still alive or not? These questions have gripped the rural communities of East Idaho, where Dylan grew up amidst stunning landscapes in the farming community. Dylan Rounds' parents, Justin and Candace, divorced when Dylan was just 4 years old. This led to him and his younger brother and sister splitting their time between Idaho Falls, where their father lived, and Twin Falls, where their mother resided. Despite the separation, both locations provided Dylan with a profound connection to the outdoors, a central aspect of Idahoan life. From a young age, he developed a deep love for the wilderness, finding solace and excitement in the great outdoors. Whether hiking through dense forests, fishing in clear mountain streams, or simply exploring rugged terrain, Dylan's affinity for nature was evident. The young man, renowned for his adventurous spirit and love of the wilderness, was reported missing on May 28, 2022. He talked to his grandmother over the phone that morning, telling her he was putting the grain truck into shelter. And then, he was not heard from again. Dylan, who had been living in an RV camper near the Nevada-Utah border in Lucerne on his own farm property, suddenly vanished. This sparked a slaying investigation that would unravel a disturbing series of events. The investigation quickly uncovered troubling evidence. During the initial search for Dylan, deputies discovered a pair of his boots near his farm. One of the boots bore a bloodstain, confirmed by DNA analysis to be Dylan's, with a man called James Brenner's DNA also found on the boots. This suggested possible tampering after Dylan's disappearance. Brenner was known to be a squatter residing on Dylan's property around the time of the young man's disappearance. According to Dylan's parents, Brenner was among the last people Dylan had contacted before he went missing. Subsequent scrutiny of Dylan's phone records revealed activity on the day he vanished at a remote property in Lucerne. The last signal from Dylan's phone was traced to the Lucerne Pond. A thorough search of the area led to the discovery of Dylan's phone. Digital forensic analysis of Dylan's phone unearthed a time-lapse video taken around the time of his disappearance. The video showed Brenner cleaning a gun, his arms and shirt visibly stained with blood. Authorities analyzed the shirt and confirmed the presence of Dylan's DNA. The accumulating evidence strongly pointed to Brenner's involvement in Dylan Rounds' disappearance and probable demise. As investigators continued their work, Dylan's family and the community awaited justice, hoping for answers that would bring closure to this tragic case. Brenner faced serious charges in March 2023 of first-degree felony and abuse or desecration of a human body. Also, a third-degree felony based on compelling evidence gathered during the investigation. Prosecution built their case on several key pieces of evidence. The time-lapse video, the shirt Brenner wore in the video that revealed traces of Dylan's DNA, and the DNA on Dylan's boots that were discovered during the initial search efforts. Beyond the evidentiary discoveries, Brenner's troubling criminal history was highlighted during the investigation. He had a documented past of violence and had previously been convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm. As legal proceedings progressed, Dylan's family and the community held on to hope for justice and closure in the devastating case. The weight of the evidence and Brenner's background painted a grim picture, leaving authorities and the public alike eager for the resolution of this tragic story. The investigation into Dylan's disappearance and presumed demise remained ongoing, with authorities diligently working to recover his body. The search efforts have been intensive, spanning the areas where Dylan was last seen and focusing on locations linked to the evidence gathered in a case against Brenner. The detectives could not find Dylan and the search went cold. Box Elder County Attorney's Office made a plea deal with Brenner. In order to lower his charges, he was required to disclose the burial site of Dylan's body. Finally, almost 2 years later, on April 9, 2024, Dylan's skeletal remains were recovered in the remote western Box Elder County area of Lucerne. He lost his life due to a gunshot wound to the head. Dylan's family has established a dedicated website and Facebook page. These platforms' initial purpose was to provide updates on the investigation's progress, share information about ongoing search efforts, and offer a means for the community to contribute tips or information that could aid in the search for Dylan. Now that he was found, they used the platforms to help with other efforts to search for missing people around the country. Dylan's story is a reminder of the impact of violence and the community's determination to seek the truth. On July 1, 2024, more than 24 family members of Dylan's attended the sentencing. Dylan's father spoke to Brenner and said, "Dylan helped you out so many times, and this is how you repay him. I just hope for the rest of your life you think about this." Dylan had paid Brenner to work on his farm and even shared meals with him at times. Brenner did not address the court and has not disclosed additional information about what transpired, leading him to take the life of Dylan. When asked if he would stand and face the family of Dylan and other friends and supporters gathered in the courtroom, he declined. James Brenner was sentenced to serve up to 30 years in prison. The judge is going to advise the parole board to keep him in prison as long as possible because of his lack of empathy. Dylan's mom said it does not necessarily put her to rest, but this court part of it and the anxiety of the consistently waiting, what is going to happen, when is it going to happen, what if it does not happen, that part we can finally lay to rest. Another family member had the following to say: "While we had hoped for a different outcome, we have known since the start Dylan was no longer alive. This recent development means the investigation has gone full circle, and now we can finally bring Dylan home and close this chapter." On a crisp October night in 2014 in the suburbs of Longueuil, Quebec, Canada, 23-year-old Janique Delcourt was savagely attacked on a bike path. Her life cruelly cut short by a brutal assault. The case baffled investigators and haunted the community, while the unknown perpetrators seemed to vanish without a trace. For years her family and friends held on to hope, even as leads grew cold and answers remained elusive. Then, nearly a decade after the brutal crime, a breakthrough would reignite the quest for justice. Janique Delcourt was a bright, vibrant young woman whose life was filled with promise and potential. Residing in Longueuil, Quebec, she was known for her infectious positivity and kind-hearted nature. At 23, she was at a stage in her life where she was exploring her passions and carving out her path for the future. In her free time, Janique enjoyed outdoor activities, including walking and cycling, often taking advantage of the scenic bike paths around Longueuil, a pastime that would abruptly end and brutally cost her life. Janique Delcourt's routine evening walk home from work turned into a horrifying nightmare on a poorly lit bike path. As she made her way along the familiar route, enjoying the solitude of the area, she was suddenly attacked with an iron bar and her life was brutally ended. Her friends and family were left grappling with grief and unanswered questions, prompting an outpouring of support and calls for justice. Immediately following the discovery of her body, Longueuil police responded swiftly. They launched an intensive investigation into the circumstances surrounding the case. A year after Janique's life was taken, a small white cross and commemorative plaque were erected in her memory near where she was assaulted. At the same time, Monique Delcourt, Janique's mother, started a petition. She says that the government is not doing enough to support the families of crime victims. Since her daughter's life ended, she has had trouble sleeping, had to stop working, and has not been able to afford to pay for therapy sessions to get professional help. She said, "I am asking for them to recognize parents of slain children as victims." She wants the government to provide more services and financial support. According to her, the government should pay for all psychotherapy sessions for parents who lost a child in a violent crime for as long as it is deemed necessary by their doctors. She also says parents should be reimbursed for damages if they are no longer capable of working as a result of their child's demise. Over the ensuing years, the investigation into Janik's case remained active, with periodic updates from authorities who promised Janik's family that they were committed to finding the perpetrator. Advancements in forensic technology and persistent police work kept hope alive for Janik's loved ones, who endured the agonizing wait for answers. After nearly a decade of relentless pursuit of justice, Long Ale police announced a major breakthrough in Janik Dawcourt's case. In May 2024, authorities revealed that Michael Macduff Jalbert, 35 years old, had been arrested. He was the man who called the police in 2014 to report the incident and was arrested soon after. But due to insufficient evidence at the time, he was released without charges, leaving the case wide open. Only this time, he was charged with first degree in connection with the brutal slaying that had shocked the community back in October 2014. The arrest was a significant development in a case that had left Janik's family and investigators frustrated and searching for answers. Chief Inspector Pierre Duquette of the Long Hill Agglomeration Police Service described the investigation as complex. He emphasized that advancements in forensic science had finally yielded critical new evidence. Details of the breakthrough were withheld to protect the integrity of the ongoing judicial proceedings, but Duquette assured the public that the determination to seek the truth and provide closure to Janik's family had never wavered. He expressed gratitude for the resilience and patience shown by Janik's parents, Monique and John Gondolfo, throughout the years. The community, deeply affected by Janik's tragic demise and the long pursuit of her perpetrator, responded with a mix of relief and sad reflection as news of the arrest spread. Vigils and tributes renewed across Long Hill, honoring Janik's memory and acknowledging the persistence of law enforcement in resolving her case. Janik's father told journalists outside the courtroom that though nothing can bring his daughter back, his family can get some sort of closure. Our daughter Janik was senselessly and brutally slain, beaten to her end by a sick individual who needs to pay for his crimes. Our family now needs time to process all of this. Nick Gondolfo, Janik's brother, remembers her as a kind, happy young woman who exuded positivity. He said it was just something that radiated off of her. I knew that if I was having a bad day, I could reach out to my younger sister and she would put a smile on my face. Just thinking about it now puts a smile on my face. As Macduff Jalbert awaits his next court appearance, the arrest offered a ray of hope that justice would finally be served for Janik Dawcourt, whose vibrant life had been cut short. On a cold November morning in 1988, Betty Rolfe disappeared during her routine walk to work, only to be found brutally assaulted and slain the next day near a railroad underpass. For over 30 years, her case remained unsolved until groundbreaking DNA evidence uncovered the truth behind Betty's tragic fate. Betty Rolfe was a beloved figure in the Grand Chute, Wisconsin community. At 60 years old, she was still a hard-working woman, juggling multiple jobs to support her family. One of her primary roles was at the Country Air Banquet Room, where she diligently handled laundry and other tasks. Her home on West Spencer Street was conveniently located less than a mile from the banquet room, making her morning walks a routine part of her day. Despite the hardships she endured, including a tumultuous marriage, Betty remained a pillar of strength and love for those around her, which would make her fate all that more tragic. On the early morning of November 6, 1988, Betty Rolfe left her home to walk to work. But that Sunday, Betty never made it to her destination. Her absence at work was unusual and immediately raised concerns among her colleagues and family. When she did not return home later that day, her family grew increasingly worried and reported her missing to the police. The next morning, a thorough search was conducted by local authorities. The community was on edge, anxiously awaiting any news about Betty's whereabouts. When her body was discovered near a railroad underpass on West Spencer Street, just half a mile from her home, Betty was found partially clothed, near a railroad crossing and bridge on West Spencer Street in Grand Chute. The scene was grim. She had been beaten, assaulted, and strangled with a strap of her purse. Some of the contents of her purse were strewn around, including $30 in cash and a document she planned to send to a local newspaper about her and her husband's upcoming anniversary. The police launched an intensive investigation, canvassing the area for witnesses and collecting evidence from the crime scene. Despite their efforts, the immediate investigation yielded few leads. The technology available at the time limited the scope of forensic analysis, and the case quickly grew cold. For over 3 decades, Betty Rolfe's slaying remained a haunting mystery. In 2019, investigators made the decision to leverage familial DNA testing, a cutting-edge technique that was becoming increasingly instrumental in solving cold cases. This innovative approach involved comparing DNA evidence collected from crime scenes with genetic profiles available in public databases. This approach aimed to identify potential relatives of the perpetrator. The breakthrough came when investigators identified a familial link to Gene Meyer. He had lived in Grand Chute around the time of Betty's tragic demise, but had since relocated to Washington state. Narrowing down the potential suspects to Meyer and his brother, authorities focused their attention on Gene Meyer, after eliminating his brother through a DNA test. In 2022, investigators obtained a direct DNA sample from Meyer while he was residing in Washington. The forensic analysis provided a conclusive match to the DNA recovered from Betty Rolfe's crime scene. It established Meyer as the prime suspect in Betty's brutal assault and slaying. He was arrested for the crime. After being arrested for the heinous 1988 crime, Meyer returned to Outagamie County, Wisconsin, and was incarcerated and awaited his trial while the legal preparations began. The prosecution meticulously built its case using the conclusive DNA evidence linking Meyer to the crime scene. As the case progressed through the judicial system, Betty Rolfe's family and the hopeful that the trial would provide answers and closure. Throughout the trial, which spanned over a week in May 2024, the courtroom watched on as the gruesome details of the crime were revisited and examined. The prosecution and defense went back and forth, arguments centering around the forensic findings and circumstances surrounding Betty's demise. The jury reached a verdict, and on May 21, 2024, Gene Meyer was found guilty of both the slaying and the horrific assault. Meyer's conviction was a sense of closure that so many had been waiting for. On July 11, 2024, Meyer was sentenced to life in prison with a chance of parole after 34 years for the first-degree slaying charge, and 20 years for the first-degree assault with a dangerous weapon charge. The 2 charges will run consecutively. Betty's daughter Sheila Worm said outside the courtroom, "We can rest easy now that they have him and that he is going away for a long time." The community of Grand Chute and Betty's loved ones found solace in knowing that accountability had been achieved of the senseless act of violence that had haunted them for over 3 decades. In Providence, Rhode Island, a chilling mystery spanning nearly a quarter-century has resurfaced with long-awaited answers. Kathleen O'Dowd Bowman, a devoted mother and waitress, met a tragic end in 1999. Her life cut short by a heinous act of violence behind Roger Williams Middle School. For decades, her family has been haunted by the absence of justice and the mystery of her tragic end. An arrest of a previously unknown suspect has reopened old wounds. Kathleen's loved ones may finally find the justice they had long been waiting for. Kathleen O'Dowd Bowman's life was a testament to resilience and devotion to her family. A mother of 4 and one of 8 siblings, Kathleen moved through life with a vibrant and a deep commitment to those she loved. Residing in Providence, Rhode Island, she was a dedicated waitress known for her warmth and generosity toward customers and co-workers alike. Her days were spent balancing the demands of work and raising her children, whom she cherished above all else. No one could have predicted the tragic fate that awaited Kathleen and the years of anguish that would follow. The day of March 11, 1999 began like any other for Kathleen, but her life came to an abrupt and tragic end. Her lifeless body was discovered strangled in a secluded area near the grounds of Roger Williams Middle School in Providence, Rhode Island. The discovery of Kathleen's body sparked an immediate and intensive investigation by Providence police. Initial efforts to piece together the events leading to her demise were met with challenges. Detectives struggled to gather sufficient evidence to identify a suspect, and despite early suspicions, the case soon grew cold. In recent years, Detective Angelo Avant took up Kathleen's case with renewed vigor. Through meticulous re-examination of evidence and persistent interviews with witnesses, Avant uncovered new leads crucial to advancing the investigation. These efforts culminated in a breakthrough when, on April 16, 2024, Kevin Williams, a 53-year-old resident of Providence, was arrested on Road Street without incident. Williams, identified as a suspect early in the original investigation but not charged, now faces charges in the first degree. His arrest was a breakthrough moment in the long quest for justice for Kathleen and her family. The legal proceedings began with Williams' arraignment on April 17, 2024, where the indictment was unsealed in Providence County Superior Court. Attorney General Peter F. Nerona emphasized how violent crimes impact victims' families, and praised Detective Angelo Avant and the Providence Police Department for making progress in the case. Colonel Oscar L. Perez Jr. also commended the police for holding Williams accountable. In addition to the charge in Kathleen's case, Williams faces charges in Providence's 6th Division Court for violating a domestic no-contact order related to another domestic violence case. Assistant Attorney General James R. Baum and Special Assistant Attorney General Ariel Pittner, along with Detective Angelo Avant, are leading the investigation and prosecution, ensuring a coordinated effort to seek justice. Williams was ordered to be held without bail pending further court appearances. The starting date of the trial must still be announced. The arrest of Kevin Williams for the slaying of Kathleen Solman is a significant step toward justice after more than 2 decades of unanswered questions and heartache. For Kathleen's family, they face a mixture of emotions. They are relieved that steps towards closure are finally being taken. Yet they are grappling with the deep sorrow of losing her in such a tragic manner, knowing no amount of justice could ever make up for their devastating loss. Tom O'Dowd, Kathleen's brother, said the family is feeling a sense of relief about the arrest, but also anger, because they do not know why the suspect targeted Kathleen nearly 25 years ago. Tom said it was very surprising because no one had heard of this guy at all before. Relieved now that someone has finally been arrested for this. Cynthia Balcom, Kathleen's sister, said in a statement, "A day does not go by where we do not think of her. When the newness of this wears off, we will take comfort in knowing that justice will finally be served. I just wish our mother was here to see this moment." On a quiet August evening in 2018, the community of Conway, South Carolina was shattered by the brutal slayings of Robert Ford and his son, Robbie Ford. Found lifeless outside their home on Highway 19, the grisly crime sent shockwaves through the small town. As investigators delved into the case, a sinister plot began to unfold, one that involved betrayal, greed, and a chilling scheme, orchestrated by someone close to home. This left many wondering what could drive a family member to such an unthinkable act. 59-year-old Robert Ford was a beloved member of the Conway community. He grew up in the area and spent much of his life serving at Good Hope Baptist Church, where he was a legacy member and the choir director for many years. Robert's deep love for music was a significant part of his identity, with a repertoire that spanned from old gospel hymns to contemporary Christian songs. Robert's commitment to his community was evident in his day-to-day life. He would share produce from his garden and always greet people with a friendly smile. The tragedy that would eventually shatter the Ford family was not the first hardship Robert endured. His beloved wife, Melda Ford, would pass away. It was a loss that deeply affected him. But despite this personal tragedy, Robert remained a pillar of strength for his family and community. 25-year-old Robbie Ford was Robert's son and a young man with a promising future. He was a student at Clemson University where he pursued his studies with the same dedication his father showed him throughout his life. The father and son bond was strong, with Robert financially supporting Robbie through his education and personal challenges. Robert also had a daughter from a previous relationship, Samantha Rabin. Samantha and Robbie, despite being half-siblings, grew up under different circumstances. While Robert and Robbie lived together in their home on Highway 19 in Conway, Samantha had her own residence and was managing her own life separately from her father's household. So, while she was part of the family, her interactions with them were less frequent and her bond with them was not as strong. By outward appearances, it seemed that the Ford family were like any other, but there were dark motives at play that would soon cost the lives of father and son. On the tragic day of August 17, 2018, neighbors of the Ford family home reported hearing gunshots that afternoon. Concerned citizens alerted authorities who swiftly responded to the scene. Upon arrival, law enforcement discovered Robert and Robbie Ford outside their home, both fatally wounded by gunshots. The crime scene painted a grim picture of calculated violence. Investigators found evidence suggesting a deliberate attempt to erase any trace of the perpetrator's identity. A vehicle linked to the Fords was discovered nearby, set on fire in an apparent effort to destroy crucial evidence. Even with the attempts to destroy evidence by the perpetrator, investigators were determined to piece together the events of that fateful day. Authorities quickly combed through physical and digital evidence and interviewed potential witnesses. These efforts led to the identification of several persons of interest based on witness accounts and circumstantial evidence. But it would take investigators 2 years to build a case and establish timelines as well as potential motives for the crime. The investigation saw significant breakthroughs as forensic analysis of physical evidence and digital trails began to yield conclusive leads. Based on accumulated evidence and witness testimonies, authorities identified 53-year-old Randy Granger as the gunman responsible for carrying out the slayings. Granger had a troubled past, and his life was marked by brushes with the law. And prior to his involvement in the Ford slayings, he had a criminal record that included convictions for violent offenses. His history of criminal activity painted a picture of a man familiar with the darker side of society. Granger was arrested in 2020 in connection to the Ford slayings, and his testimony later proved pivotal in unraveling the web of events surrounding the crime. DNA evidence recovered from cigarette butts and a partially burned skull cap was found to match Granger's DNA profile. It was not long after Randy Granger's arrest that Samantha Rabin, Robert Ford's daughter and Robbie's half-sister, was implicated as the mastermind behind the violent crime. It seemed that the motive was to claim a significant inheritance, including insurance money. Samantha had promised Granger $20,000 to carry out the slayings. The recent Martin, Granger's girlfriend, was also charged with being an accessory after the fact. Martin had allegedly facilitated a connection between Samantha and Granger and drove Samantha to and from the crime scene. The court proceedings were complex and extended over several years, involving multiple testimonies, forensic evidence, and legal arguments. Granger's trial concluded in April 2023, where he faced charges of the fatal crime, arson, and criminal conspiracy. His testimony about his involvement was corroborated by DNA evidence and the testimony of Martin, and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years for arson and criminal conspiracy. Samantha Rabin's trial concluded in February 2024. She faced charges of fatal violence, conspiracy to commit the slaying, and solicitation of it, and various forensic experts, with evidence including text messages and phone records showing Samantha's coordination with Granger and Martin. The prosecution emphasized the financial motive, focusing on the significant inheritance Samantha stood to gain from the demise of her father and half-brother. 15th Judicial Circuit Senior Assistant Solicitor Lee Andrew Waller said, "Samantha had a million reasons to do this. She described the elder Ford's assets, including a 401k investment accounts with Edward Jones, life insurance, a home, and $100,000 in a bank account. Upon Robert's demise, Robbie Ford would have been the primary beneficiary. She also said that Samantha was residing in a single wide trailer with her husband and 3 children, subsisting on $30,000 a year at the time of the slayings. She later moved into her deceased father's home. Ultimately, Samantha Rabin was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences totaling 30 years for the conspiracy and solicitation charges. Teresa Martin's case was resolved through a plea deal, where she pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact. Her testimony was crucial in the trials of both Granger and Samantha, detailing her role and the involvement of the other 2 perpetrators. Martin is awaiting sentencing, but is expected to receive a reduced sentence due to her cooperation with the prosecution. While the Ford family seemed to have a fair share of secrets, the tragic case of Robert and Robbie Ford has left a lasting impact on their community. Their untimely demise shocked and saddened all who knew them. And despite the betrayal surrounding the crime, the community finds some solace in the justice search. The holiday turned into a nightmare when a mother woke up convinced something was wrong. And it was. The gruesome events of the night would lay shrouded in mystery for 36 years. But all those years ago, in 1984, a little girl decided she would help find the perpetrator, and she did as an investigator. On Thanksgiving evening in 1984, 14-year-old Wendy Jerome left her friend's house in Rochester, New York, but never made it home. Wendy and her father Wayne had cooked Thanksgiving dinner together. It was a heartwarming thing. Wendy's mom worked as a nurse. She had a tough routine, working at the Beechwood nursing home. After dinner, Wendy was helping out her father with the dishes while her mother went to take a nap upstairs. The two planned to eat dessert once the dishes were done and Marlene had awakened from her nap. Her little brother Bill was playing. Born on November 1, 1970, Wendy had just turned 14 years old a few days ago. She had some independence since her birthday and wanted to do things on her own. Wendy asked her father if she could walk over to her friend Susie Keller's house. It was not that far, just a few blocks away. It was her friend's birthday the following day, and Wendy wanted to give her a birthday card. Wayne allowed it since her curfew was 8 p.m. anyway, and it was 7, which meant she would be back in no time. Waking up with a sudden, overwhelming urge to find her daughter, Marlene was uneasy. She had a bad feeling and ran down the stairs hastily asking, "Where's Wendy?" Wayne reassured Marlene that Wendy was visiting a friend and would be home soon, urging her not to worry. By 8:15 p.m., panic set in as Wendy was still not home. It was only 15 minutes past her curfew, but it was still worrisome as she was never late. Early maybe, but never late. They began calling the Keller family but received no answer. Marlene's first question was, "Is Wendy with you?" Susie's mother paused in shock and said, "Marlene, hang up the phone and call the police right now." A short while later, Marlene's worst fears were confirmed when Wendy was found in an alcove alongside School 33. A 22-year-old discovered her lifeless body between Schools 33 and 11. He said that he was heading to a bar when he noticed someone lying down, so he left it alone, initially assuming they were drunk. Upon closer inspection, he saw blood. Afraid, he went to a friend's house before returning to the scene to confirm what he saw prior to contacting the police. Officers on the scene realized she was no more and that she had been brutally assaulted and left to take her last agonizing breaths alone. In 5 minutes, police were at Marlene's door, and they told her what happened to Wendy. According to her mother, the schoolyard where Wendy's body was discovered was not on her route to Susie's house. Marlene believes that Wendy, nearing her curfew, may have attempted to visit another friend in the neighborhood and took a shortcut by the school. The initial investigation revealed severe blunt force trauma, including a fractured skull from a significant blow. She had been assaulted. Dr. Nicholas Forbes conducted a medical examination of Wendy's body and determined that severe blunt force trauma to her skull had finally taken her life. Wendy's autopsy further revealed that at least 2 different types of objects were used to cause her bruises and wounds. They could also have been hands. The marks were distinct. They were both blunt force trauma with any object and sharp force trauma caused by something that would cut through her body. Could have been a knife or a piece of glass. The family could not overcome this tragedy. Wayne and Marlene divorced because deep down she blamed her husband for what happened. Bill Jerome, Wendy's brother, was afraid of everything after his elder sister was so brutally taken. He was afraid that the assailant was still out there running free. For the first time in his life, he was afraid of the dark. He would hardly go out to play, and when he did, he was afraid and wary of everyone around him. After the divorce, Wayne moved to Florida. Marlene was not content with what the police were doing. Nearly a decade passed, and Marlene fought hard to know more details of the night. She was not allowed to see the crime scene, visit the body in the morgue, or even look at the photos. Marlene demanded to see the crime scene photos after investigators had informed her that Wendy was unconscious and unaware of what had happened to her that day. They said she passed peacefully. Once she got a copy of the autopsy report, it turned out she was in the dark. Marlene became furious. She felt betrayed, believing they had misled her when she had directly asked them about Wendy's struggle with her assailant. She felt deeply betrayed. Once she saw the photos, she had some closure. She had imagined Wendy to be lying exposed for the world to see, undressed, indecent, in a way she would never have wanted to be seen. Marlene suffered for 9 long years before she saw the photos and found a bit of comfort. The photos also showed Marlene what investigators had known all along. Wendy had been dressed, wearing jeans and a brown sweater jacket adorned with unicorns and hearts. Her pink hoodie, which she always carried with her, was placed over her battered face. So whoever committed the heinous act allowed Wendy to get dressed before taking her life so brutally. The investigators had promised Marlene that Wendy went in peace and knew nothing of what happened to her later, including all the blows to her head. But the presence of defensive wounds told a story of absolute terror, as Wendy would have fought for her life, completely aware of what was happening to her contrary to what the investigators told Marlene. Each birthday, November the 1st, it was hard for the family. They would cry and they would miss Wendy. But Marlene believed one day the perpetrator would be brought to justice. Back in the 80s and 90s, DNA technology was in its initial phases. But years later, forensics would have a chance to bring the perpetrator to justice. Officer Paul Boccaccino spoke to at least 30 people from the neighborhood 6 days after Wendy's tragic demise. The investigation officers also took care to preserve the evidence. The crime scene included objects like a cigarette pack, a lighter, the hair of the perpetrator, and Wendy's clothes. There were some things not investigated enough. The witness was interviewed, but he was not a prime suspect. The fact that he first went to a friend's house, then came back to the crime scene, was entirely suspicious. The witness also had the exact same hair type found at the crime scene. He should have been investigated further. 6 years later, he took his own life. Was that an admission of guilt? Initially, investigators focused on another local man who claimed he had been assaulted that night, but was eliminated via blood typing analysis. In 1984, when Julie Hahn was just 11 years old, she learned about the tragic slaying of Wendy Jerome, a case that would deeply impact her and eventually shape her career. Wendy's case haunted Rochester for years, becoming a significant part of the community's consciousness. This early exposure to such a haunting event instilled in Hahn a sense of justice and a drive to pursue a career where she could make a difference. Years later, she became a chief prosecutor in the Major Felony Bureau of the Monroe County District Attorney's Office. Her commitment to justice led her to work on Wendy's case starting in 2011. She went through everything with a fresh perspective and was able to conduct DNA analysis. This included cross-checking the witness who took his own life's DNA. Should the DNA not match with the witness, Hahn had plans to analyze other items found at the scene, such as the cigarette pack and lighter, using advanced, high-sensitivity DNA technology. Hahn and her team realized additional evidence could be tested. They conducted familial DNA testing in April of 2019. By July, there was a fresh list of potential suspects. There was evidence from Wendy's clothes and bodily secretions from the crime scene. In 2020, they were able to conduct a familial DNA search. It allows for screening through relatives' DNA profiles. This means anyone sharing the same blood in the family could be accessed if their relative's DNA was on the databank. It brought them to a person questioned all those years ago, who was 20 years old at the time of Wendy's tragedy. His name was Timothy Williams, their next-door neighbor at the time. Police were able to collect a DNA sample from the suspect secretly while he was in Florida. The sample matched the DNA evidence from the crime scene. 36 years later, they finally had a positive match. Williams was finally arrested on September 9, 2020. Hahn was among the investigators who called Marlene. Marlene had remarried Wayne when he was diagnosed with cancer. He passed away in 2011. 36 years after that Thanksgiving night on a regular Thursday, she received the call she had longed for. Timothy Williams became the first person in the state to go on trial with an arrest relying on familial DNA. During the trial, Williams claimed he had consensual intimacy with Wendy and did not harm her. He expressed fear of being charged with forceful assault if he came forward. He had been questioned all those years ago. He was a neighbor back then, 20 years old. But he lied to the police. Now in custody, he told a very different story. He said he met her at a corner store and believed her to be of age and was in a relationship with her. However, the district attorney countered these claims, highlighting the brutal nature of Wendy's injuries, which contradicted William's story. Wendy's mother had the following to say about his claims. "My daughter Wendy was the sweetest, the most caring little girl in the whole world. I just want everybody to know, no matter what was said, it was not true, and she was and always will be my heart." Initially, the trial faced a setback with a mistrial due to juror misconduct. However, a subsequent trial led to Williams being found guilty of 3 counts of second-degree slaying. On April 17, 2024, New York State Supreme Court Justice Alex Renzi sentenced the 60-year-old Williams to 25 years to life in the New York State Department of Corrections. District Attorney Dorley expressed relief and gratitude to the Rochester police investigators, stating that the maximum sentence was the only appropriate action. She emphasized that after all these years, Timothy Williams did not escape justice for the heinous acts he committed against Wendy. Wendy's mother Marlene attended the court proceedings and, after the guilty verdict, expressed a bittersweet sense of closure. After 36 years, Timothy Williams believed he got away with it. But thanks to Julie Haunt's relentless pursuit of the truth and a mother's conviction to justice, he was named, shamed, and put behind bars where he belonged. Finally, Wendy Jerome's family had some closure, and the faceless monster from their dreams was caged. Marlene's last words after the sentencing were, "It was the evening of July 9, 1994. Teenager Tiffany was looking forward to dinner that night. Our mother had called around 5:30 p.m. to tell her she would be home for dinner after a quick stop at her ex-boyfriend's house. Tiffany was okay with it because there was plenty of time before dinner. They were going to be joined by a guest, so there was time to prepare. Little did she know, that was the last time she would hear her mother's voice." 34-year-old single mother Kimberly Langwell did not show up for dinner that night. Her new boyfriend, Ken Weatherford, went out looking for her. He found something strange. Her car was abandoned at a pharmacy, yet there was no sign of Kimberly. Where did she go? Born on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1965, in Beaumont, Texas, Kimberly Langwell grew up and spent most of her life there. She was incredibly attractive from a very young age and had all kinds of attention. Finding herself pregnant at only 18 years old, Kimberly did not give up on life. She raised Tiffany alone and made ends meet by working various jobs. She finally found work at a chemical plant, which meant she did not have to work 3 jobs anymore. A mobile oil refinery, to be precise. She wanted to give her daughter the best life that she could. Kimberly had just gotten out of a bad relationship. Her ex-boyfriend, Terry Rose, regretted many things about their relationship, one of which was being physically abusive toward Kimberly. After living together for 7 years, the two split up, something Tiffany welcomed as she was not happy with her mother dating this man from the start. But the two remained on civil terms, friends, if one could call it that. There are various stories about what really happened between Terry and Kimberly. According to Kimberly's sister, Susan, he was increasingly possessive to the point where Kimberly did not feel safe with him. She even warned her family that if anything happened to her, they should suspect him, as he had threatened her life and exhibited violent behavior. Kimberly had gone as far as providing potential locations where her body might be found if she went missing, but others said Kimberly cheated on him with a friend, causing them to go their separate ways. Yet Terry showered her with expensive gifts. He would give her cash and presents like a $500 vacation trip to Cancun, just to get her back. But the trip she said she would go on with girlfriends turned out to be a vacation with a new man. Terry was bitter, but he remained civil. Kimberly was quite openly dating someone new now. Ken Weatherford was a whole new chapter in her life. They worked together and had a much better relationship than what she had with Terry. Kimberly usually got off work at 5 p.m. Between 5:15 and 5:30, she told her daughter she would stop by Terry's house to help him. He was remodeling his house and Kimberly was going to assist him in hanging up boards. When she left the house for work that day, she was wearing a white shirt with the words Cozumel on the front and a diver on the back. It was a shirt she got from her Cancun trip with Ken. She paired it with blue jeans and white tennis shoes. She wore a silver-toned Seiko watch with glowing numbers on it, and a silver necklace with an angel pendant. She finished her look with silver hoop earrings and a gold wedding band she wore to avoid attention from men. An hour later, Tiffany started to worry. Kimberly was not answering any calls on her cell phone. She always kept her phone nearby. When Kimberly did not arrive home on time, her worried daughter called the ex-boyfriend to inquire about her mother. He claimed Kimberly had already left and then began angrily questioning Tiffany about why he was not invited to dinner. He showed more concern for the dinner snub than for Kimberly's absence. Tiffany notified Kimberly's current boyfriend, Ken, that her mother never showed up for dinner. Concerned, he went looking for her at local shops, bars, and regular hangouts. He found her 1994 Nissan Altima abandoned at an Eckerd's pharmacy located at the corner of Dallin Road and Flynn Boulevard. Her purse and keys were missing, but her cell phone and other personal items were left in the car. This was highly suspicious since Kimberly was known to always be on her phone. Given her fear of her ex-boyfriend, it seemed unlikely she would part with her cell phone, especially if she needed to contact her daughter in an emergency. Extensive searches around the abandoned car brought about no clues to where she was. Back in 1999, surveillance cameras were not as readily available as they are today, so there were no camera recordings to review. There were no signs of a struggle or any evidence released by the police, although they suspected foul play. Kimberly's last known phone call was with her daughter Tiffany. Since that call, she has never been heard from again by friends or family. Kimberly's family was devastated, and her brother Norman took it upon himself to investigate her disappearance. He set up a personal database, collecting data and evidence in hopes of finding his sister. Family and friends were sure that Kimberly would never have willingly left her daughter, whom she raised on her own and was very close to. Kimberly's siblings, Susan and Norman, tirelessly put up flyers and worked to spread the word about her disappearance. Their efforts were driven by the certainty that Kimberly would not have abandoned her daughter or her life. Dee Keene, a survivor of kidnapping and assault, spent years trying to help Kimberly's family. She and her husband could be seen handing out flyers for Kimberly each year, dedicatedly. Penn was quickly ruled out as a suspect, since he had alibis and was actively involved in the investigation. But officers focused on Terry Rose, whom she had lived with for 7 years just 6 months before her disappearance. Terry managed a wrecking yard and towing operation in Beaumont called Terry's Wrecker Service. It was easy to dispose of a body. Initially, he said Kimberly stopped by to help him hang boards. Kimberly had told a friend she would stop by Terry's house to pick up her personal items. Perhaps seeing her in a Cancun shirt reminded him of her betrayal. He had also conveniently told the officers he was home alone before he went to the corner pocket pool hall that shared a parking lot with the Eckerd pharmacy. He went around 9:45 p.m., and so he already had an explanation of why his car might be spotted there. Another suspect was Kimberly's co-worker, 49-year-old Frank McCormick. He was a supervisor at the Mobil oil refinery and married, yet he had an obsessive infatuation with Kimberly. He wrote her a number of love letters, and in 1999 Kimberly gave those letters to a friend for safekeeping. He offered her thousands of dollars so that she could take a trip to Europe with her daughter. Yet he was cleared as a suspect as well, after years of investigation. He had receipts from 1999, where he bought chips from a grocery store for a poker night with friends. Kimberly's family, particularly her sister, strongly believed that Terry was responsible for her disappearance. Although his name never came up on websites, Susan's blog mentioned him repeatedly as the prime suspect. It all started when she called Terry to inform him of Kimberly's disappearance. His response was bitter and cold. "Good. Now you will see how I feel." Later, he called to announce he was taking a lie detector test, yelling aggressively at the family. 3 months after Kimberly went missing, Terry called the house and, in an overly cheerful tone, asked if they had heard from Kim lately. This call deeply disturbed the family. In November 2002, he approached Tiffany, Kimberly's daughter, and asked if she had heard from her mother. Kimberly's sister immediately called him to confront his sick behavior. During this call, he revealed that he had failed a lie detector question about whether he had taken the life of Kimberly. Terry's actions, including his insensitive remarks and tormenting behavior, only intensified the family's suspicions and their pain. Despite the lack of concrete evidence tying him to Kimberly's disappearance, they were sure he did it. Shockingly, 5 years after the disappearance of Kimberly, Terry Rose's father was fatally clubbed with a candlestick. He took his last breaths at his door. The assailant was never found, but that seemed irrelevant to detectives. They believed she could have simply been abducted from the pharmacy by a stranger, or have been taken by a serial assailant. A new team of investigators started the investigation from the beginning and came across some incriminating information. Reliable information came through in April of 2024. A former employee at Terry's wrecker service said he saw Kimberly's car on July 9, 1999 at 5:50 p.m. By 6:20 p.m., her car was gone. This was an important piece of information because it placed her near Terry. That same month, a trip to the police would turn out to be the break they were waiting for. The informant, who remained anonymous, said Kimberly was buried at Terry's house. A warrant was obtained to search his wrecking yard, and his residence at the 1600 block of the FBI assisted the police with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. The search warrant was executed on Monday, June 10, 2024. The officers found a 3-foot by 5-foot area with no steel rebar under a bedroom floor. The bedroom belonged to Terry Sunday. It was obviously cut out, and according to the investigators, it was a perfect size for a body to be buried in. Wire and mesh rebar had been cut out. Police found human remains on the property around 3 a.m. Thursday, June 13th. They were hastily wrapped in a blanket. There was not anything left to identify, but the remains were sent to the lab for testing. After all these years of running free while having done something so horrible, Terry Rose's luck was up. He was arrested the very same day. 25 years later, the perpetrator was finally in the grasp of the law. There was nothing to save Terry now. With his smug remarks and snarky comments about Kimberly's disappearance, all those years of gloating were over. 67 years old now, he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars where he belonged. This find brought some closure to Kimberly Langwell's family, who could finally bury her as intended. Her daughter Tiffany expressed her gratitude to finally having her mother's remains back. She said, "I have known that since the day that she was gone. She has been there. So it is tough. It is tough to know where your mom is, and there is nothing you can do." Terry Rose is currently being held in custody on $1 million bail. If he posts bail and leaves, he must wear a GPS monitoring onglet and cannot leave Jefferson County. Across nearly 3 decades, a predator with a sinister obsession inflicted brutality upon women and mutilated their bodies in pursuit of twisted gratification. Had it not been for one victim's desperate call, perhaps the perpetrator might have remained elusive. While she lost her life, her 911 call would bring an investigation, which would uncover many other bodies. The ruthless assailant would go down in history as the Long Island perpetrator. Here is a timeline of the series of events that led to this name. 2 hunters were tracking game in a heavily wooded area in Southampton, New York on November 21, 1993. As they neared 50 Old Fish Cove Road, they discovered something strange. It was a body only partially clothed in the forest. It appeared to have been lying in the forest for at least 2 days. Authorities reached the site and tried to identify her by her clothes. The medical examiner confirmed 2 things. The 28-year-old had been brutally strangled. There was also evidence that she had been taken advantage of and then slain in a lustful rage. Once the fingerprints were analyzed, they were able to inform her loved ones. It was Sandra Kostasha. Her fingerprints had been added to the database when she was arrested the previous year for jumping a subway turnstile. During the autopsy, the examiner was able to lift 3 strands of hair from her body that did not belong to her and were possibly her assailants. An autopsy indicated she had over 25 blows and injuries, which were sharp force trauma inflicted on her body once she had lost her life. Her face and torso were brutally affected by the slashes. Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, Sandra had been living in New York City. She was like a nomad with no permanent address. Her last address on record was in Queens, but she was not living there when she lost her life. There were rumors that she was an escort, but that was never confirmed. Authorities implied her lifestyle was a bit similar, since she would take money, favors, and presents in exchange for her company. There were not many leads to go on, but about 8 years later, in 2001, the Suffolk County prosecutors announced a connection to John Bittrolf. Bittrolf was a carpenter in the area convicted of taking the lives of 2 women whose bodies were recovered in the same part of Long Island. He was not charged as there was a lack of evidence. The case stayed in the files on the shelves and there was not much to go on. A decade after Sandra disappeared, Manorville was in the news again. This time, a dismembered torso of a woman had been washed ashore on the beach. A woman was walking her dog along the shore when she came across the unclothed and dismembered body. She was decapitated and missing her hand, and had a severely mutilated tattoo on her back. The tattoo was a couple of cherries, and it appeared the perpetrator tried to cut it out with a knife. But mutilating the tattoo was unsuccessful. The medical examiner was able to reconstruct the words, and that led to the identification of the body as belonging to Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old escort. Family was everything to Jessica. She loved to play with her 2 brothers, and she was always one to cuddle up on the couch with her mother. It was not possible for her to miss her mother's birthday, so when she did not show up for the birthday party, her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. The tattoo that led to her identification read Remy's Angel. Remy was a man named Khalil White who knew Jessica personally. Khalil was alternately described as Jessica's pimp and boyfriend. He claimed she would have been working in Queens. She was last seen working in Manhattan, according to other reports and witnesses. But Khalil White was adamant that Jessica would have been working elsewhere. Born in New York City in 1984, Jessica fell into hard times and became an escort. She was on record for being arrested in Atlantic City and Washington, D.C. Eventually, after moving to New York a month before her demise, she was arrested in the Big Apple as well. She had been working the streets near the Port Authority bus terminal between July 18th and 21st, an area once known as the Minnesota Strip. This stretch of 8th Avenue between 42nd and 57th Streets was notorious in the 1970s for its high activity related to prostitution. This was after Minnesota passed strict anti-prostitution laws, prompting many women to move to New York City. During that period, the punk rock band The Dictators wrote a song called The Minnesota Strip. The Strip is hopping on Friday night. They come from so far away. Talking about young girls from all over the country coming to the big city with big dreams only to turn tricks on the streets. There was not much information available when they looked for the perpetrator. Shannon Gilbert disappeared on May 1, 2010 after visiting a client she met on Craigslist in the gated community of Oak Beach on Long Island, New York. The night she vanished, she made a haunting call to 911. "There is somebody after me," she told an operator before fleeing from the client's home at around 5 a.m. "Somebody is after me. Please." Her disappearance prompted a search, which led to the discovery of 4 bodies. During the winter of 2010, another body was recovered within the Manorville area. It was the body of Melissa Barthelme, an escort who went missing 3 years before in 2007. The officer who discovered her body did not realize what was in store. Just a couple of days after this gruesome discovery, 3 other call girls were found deceased within a quarter-mile span, 500 feet apart from each other. All the victims had advertised their services on Craigslist and were in their 20s. She left the Holiday Inn to meet a client on Long Island and was never heard from again. The second victim, Amber Lynn Costello, was from North Babylon. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was from Connecticut. They were all working in New York. Aside from this fact, there was nothing to connect them. Authorities finally labeled these incidents as slayings and suspected the presence of a possible serial assailant. 4 latest slaying victims were named the Gilgo 4. Despite extensive investigations, no suspects were publicly named in any of the cases. On March 29, 2011, police discovered a skull, forearm, and hands during an investigation at Gilgo Beach. They were the missing body parts of Jessica Taylor, whose torso was found in Manorville in 2003. Detectives came together to work on the case. These cases were then linked to the Long Island perpetrator. Many other cases were ruled out, since it did not seem to follow a particular pattern. The key piece of evidence collected over the years was a black leather belt. The initials HM were embossed into the belt. Some read it as RM or even RH. A decade rolled by. In February 2022, authorities established a task force comprising local, state, and federal investigators. They primarily focused on cell phone data records, analyzing all the numbers called by the victims or who called on the victims' phones in their final days. Friends, family, and loved ones were thoroughly vetted. Their investigation led them to one common suspect and two key locations: Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa Park. Whoever the perpetrator was, he operated in these two areas. Disposing of the bodies in the ocean resulted in them washing ashore in the tide, something he had not anticipated. 1 month later, the task force made a breakthrough. Amber Lynn Costello, the woman whose remains were found in 2010's roommate, Dave Schaller, recalled seeing a Chevrolet Avalanche parked outside their home the day before she disappeared. Amber was last seen with a client on September 2, 2010. It was a tall man with oval glasses. Dave recounted coming home to find Amber hiding in the bathroom while a large man threatened her. He said the man was large like Frankenstein. He then confronted the man, leading to a physical altercation that forced the man to leave in his truck. The next day, other witnesses reported seeing a similar truck shortly after Amber left to meet her client. Dave said this man was the first person he thought of when he heard about Amber's case. For 13 years, that face and truck never left his mind. This would prove to be an important lead. The task force that was investigating these disappearances and slayings obtained the registration history of this truck. The distinctive dark green Chevrolet Avalanche was traced to one person who fit the description of the Long Island perpetrator, a 59-year-old architect named Rex Heuermann. When authorities investigated further, it came as a surprise that Dave's description of the assailant was not further traced back to the owner, because he checked all the boxes. The description was simply set aside in a case file and never investigated. Everything about Rex Heuermann's movements incriminated him. His cell phone pings were near Midtown Manhattan, near his office located at 5th Avenue and 36th Street. The second location of pings was Avenue Massapequa Park, which was where Heuermann lived. Further investigation in July 2022 would bring out some interesting details. Officers discreetly went through the trash cans outside Heuermann's home. The trash cans held 11 mysterious bottles, but these very bottles held crucial DNA evidence that would decide the fate of the Long Island victims. This DNA evidence was compared to the hair lifted from Sandra Castiza and Megan Waterman's bodies. Surprisingly, it did not just point at Rex Heuermann. The DNA also belonged to his wife. She was cleared once investigators realized that she was out of state each time one of the Gilgo Beach tragedies would have occurred. But how did her DNA end up with the victims? There was another lead when detectives made another discovery from pizza crusts that Rex Heuermann discarded in his trash. Plainclothes detectives had been following Rex Heuermann, waiting for him to hand them some form of evidence so that he could be arrested. And he delivered it in a box, quite literally. While he was under surveillance, officers saw him throw a pizza box into a sidewalk garbage can outside his office building. The Suffolk County Crime Laboratory collected the discarded crusts and tested them for DNA. Investigators then went through Heuermann's internet history, which revealed dark obsessions. There were over 200 searches regarding the Gilgo 4. Heuermann had gone deeper, looking up pictures of the grieving families of the victims. Some of the searches were obvious. Why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial perpetrator? Why has the Long Island serial perpetrator not been caught? And new phone technology may be key to break-in case. He was deeply involved in this case. He had looked up podcasts and documentaries regarding the 4 famous victims. He even searched about the 2022 task force that was created to fish him out. This was ironic, considering they were zeroing in on him simultaneously uncovering information about him. Investigators proved that he used burner phones to call up escort services and had a separate email account for soliciting street workers online via Craigslist. The Google warrant was obtained in secrecy so that Heuermann would not be alerted to the investigations or how close he was to the grasp of the law. His email accounts were used to watch some disturbing macabre forms of adult films. They were mostly torture films of women and children being abused in all ways possible. He even used this account to exchange selfies with future intimate companions. Further investigations uncovered additional suspicious details that, although not directly related to the case, provided insight into his background. Courts against drivers. He alleged severe and permanent injuries from car accidents, according to court records. 3 of these cases were resolved through settlements or discontinuation, while the most recent one remained ongoing. During an April 2018 deposition for one of the cases, Hoyerman shared information about his personal and professional life. He stated that he still lived in his childhood home in Massapequa Park, Long Island, with his wife of 22 years, daughter and stepson. When asked about sports, he mentioned that his only competitive activity was rifle shooting. As a gun enthusiast, Hoyerman possessed an impressive collection of firearms. Hoyerman had also defaulted on taxes for over a decade. Nassau County records show that he was served with 6 tax liens that were filed by the IRS between 2010 and 2021. His tax debt exceeded $425,000. Police began compiling evidence to build a case against him and arrest him. Who is Rex Hoyerman? An architect originally from Manhattan, Hoyerman attended Alfred G. Berner High School, a while living in the same house in Massapequa Park. His house was poorly supported by bare wood. There was even grass on the roof and faded shingles. The yard was always messy, sticking out like a sore thumb amongst the neat homes on the rest of the block. The working-class suburb was an hour's drive from Midtown Manhattan, where he would work later on. He was a wood enthusiast and crafted furniture at a workshop in his house. He was married to Asa Ellerup in the very same house. Asa had a son with special needs, whom Hoyerman raised as his own. The couple also had a daughter together. An architectural consultant in Manhattan since 1987, Rex Hoyerman worked on significant projects and for notable clients such as Cipriani. Steve Kronberg, a property manager who worked with Hoyerman for 30 years, described him as a big goofy guy a little bit on the nerdy side. In contrast, others like Nicholas Furshaw, a neighbor, characterized Hoyerman as creepy and unapproachable, someone who seemed to lurk in the shadows, advising their children to stay away because he was not very welcoming to trick-or-treaters. Hoyerman was known as an average man who followed a daily routine, heading to the Massapequa Park station dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase. According to a neighbor named Barry Auslander, Hoyerman appeared to be a typical businessman, someone who blended in without drawing suspicion. He was neither exceptionally charismatic nor particularly unpleasant. Hoyerman was the president of an architectural firm he founded in 1994, RH Consultants and Associates, where his daughter Victoria Hoyerman was also employed. The firm is reputable, with clients including Catholic Charities, NYCDEP, and sewage treatment, American Airlines, and other major tenants at JFK International Airport. An interior designer who was part of the same networking group as Hoyerman claimed he left her unsettling voicemails despite them never having worked together or met in person. He left these voicemails at the end of February after she had finished her involvement with the group. Their connection was solely through the networking group. In February of 2022, while the task force was being set up to zero in on Hoyerman, he was invited on a YouTube realtor's show, Bonjour Realty. It gives a glimpse into the personality of Rex Hoyerman as he described himself to Antoine Amira. His 18-minute interview shed some light on his personality and how he read up on building and administrative codes and kept a library of books that are considered obsolete. By June 12, 2023, the lab had proof that the mitochondrial DNA profiles from the male hair found on Megan Waterman and the DNA swab from the pizza were the same. This was an exact match to the scene of the crime and a first-hand sample of DNA, which provided them with a warrant. They could then move ahead and get their man. Detectives also believe that Hoyerman had quite possibly slayed his victims inside his Massapequa Park home in Long Island, New York. His wife and children were also away visiting another state when he was carrying out such atrocities. After a lot of secrecy, they had enough to bring him in. There were confirmed reports of a soundproof secret chamber in the house. According to Rex, Hoyerman also had more than 279 licensed weapons with 90 pieces of arms known to others. Quite a gun collection, and all the more reason to avoid risking a shootout. They had to be discreet and quick when arresting him. On July 23, 2023, he was walking on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan. Unbeknownst to him, plainclothes officers were surrounding him in an attempt to arrest him without resistance. To their surprise, Hoyerman came almost willingly without any emotions. Not even surprised, he was just incredibly quiet. After his arrest, authorities arrived at his house in Massapequa Park to confiscate his electronic devices, which might contain crucial evidence. During this time, they also informed his wife and children about the charges. At the time of his arrest, his family was at home. As the police cars arrived with sirens blaring, Asa and her children were in shock and bewildered. Neighbors came out to witness the commotion, unable to believe that the seemingly ordinary architect next door, who worked a regular 9-to-5 job, was a dangerous individual. Although reports of a soundproof vault were debunked, authorities did find a large vault in the basement, secured with a heavy iron door. Inside, it contained a substantial cache of arms and ammunition, all belonging to Hoyerman. Turns out, Rex Hoyerman even had ties to Hollywood, as tweeted by famous actor Billy Baldwin. Tweet read, "Woke up this morning to learn that the Long Island serial perpetrator suspect was my high school classmate, Rex Hoyerman." Suffolk County DA's office charged him with first-degree slaying and 3 counts of second-degree slaying. The victims whose tragedies he was charged with were their Gilgo 4, namely Melissa Bartholomew, 24, Megan Waterman, 22, Amber Lynn Costello, 27, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25. Court appearance ended with Hoyerman pleading not guilty, but he was denied bail due to the gruesome nature of the crimes. He was placed under a watch that would prevent him from taking his own life. His family was plagued by reporters as they tried to come to terms with the morbid reality. His family was constantly filmed as they tried to gather their belongings from the house. It was likely that Hoyerman took advantage of his family being out of town, committing the slayings each time they left. A theory is that he also tried to frame John Beltroff by ensuring his DNA was on at least 2 of the victims before copying his modus operandi and taking their lives, in short, setting him up. A week after his arrest, Asa Hoyerman filed for divorce. The house was thoroughly searched for 2 weeks. A massive amount of evidence was uncovered. A planning document was found on a laptop in the Hoyerman family home and appeared to have been created in 2000. The document had seemingly been edited as recently as 2002. In the document, 4 categories are listed, which is likely a reference to Target. Under the category TRG, it is written that small is good, leading investigators to believe that he is referring to a victim's size. All the known victims thus far are all petite women, which is consistent with the small is good entry. The document then goes into further detail with the categories pre-prep, prep, and post-event. Under each category, details like change tires and dispose of pics are written. Additionally, a separate section apparently details the steps taken to dispose of the body. Remove head and hands, remove marks from torture, and package for transport are included under the category labeled body prep. His intent was to locate these victims, to hunt them down and to bring them under his control, and to then take their life. Criminal analysts believe that Hoyerman conceivably took lives even after 2010. These were simply the victims that became publicly known. On June 7, 2024, Rex Hoyerman was charged with 2 more slayings aside from the 4 that would get him prison time. Jessica Taylor and Sandra Kostasha would finally get justice thanks to DNA tests. The hair lifted from their body was a positive match for Rex Hoyerman's DNA. While he has pled not guilty, the evidence is unquestionable. He will be prosecuted for the atrocities he committed. Jasmine Robinson, Jessica's cousin who had been advocating for justice in the case, had the following to say after Hoyerman was arrested in 2023. "We are very aware that this year marks 20 years of Jessica being gone. It is the same amount of time that she got to be alive before being taken from us in one of the most awful ways imaginable." She also then expressed hope that Hoyerman's arrest may lead to a break in Jessica's case as well, which in 2024 it did. Jasmine also had the following to say, "Jessica was a person who was a true force. She had a huge heart and she is incredibly loved and missed. She was an inspiration and somebody that I looked up to. She also had a feisty streak and would stand up for herself when necessary. She did not easily take disrespect.